Hello, a very warm welcome to all of you in this continuation of journey where we seek to understand the Partnership Act 1932 section by section. This is the only video series on YouTube where you will find such section by section analysis of an act, and you can check the section by section analysis of the Easements Act right here in the info cards. And now let's begin with today's video. Today we'll start from section 14, that is firm properties, or what can be called as firm properties. Till now we have covered up to section 13 in 3 videos. Again, linked up right here. Feel free to check it out before jumping into this video or after checking this video out. Having said that, let's begin today's video, shall we? Okay, so before jumping in straight to section 14, here are all the points that will be discussed in today's video, time-stamped, and the video will also be divided into chapters. So feel free to skip around to any particular point of your choice. Now, let's jump to section 14. Section 14 talks about properties of a firm. What can be considered as a firm property? So if you have a look into the section, firstly, it says that it is subject to any contract between the parties. That is, if there is any contract between the partners and the provisions of that contract are in contradiction with the provisions of this section, the provisions of the contract will take effect and not the provisions of this section. We have seen this many times in this act already. But having said that, let's understand what are the provisions of this section. What can be called as firm properties? Let's count them. Firstly, any property or rights and interest in a property bought originally to the stock of the firm. So sometimes what happens that when a partner brings in capital to the firm, they don't necessarily bring in money as their investment to the firm. She can bring in property as her investment to the firm. That can also happen. If I have to give you a practical anecdote in the matter, very recently, I had the good fortune of working in a case of tenancy dispute where the tenanted property was a firm property, and that property became a firm property because it was bought originally by one of the partners into the firm as her investment. So this can actually happen, and when this happens, that is, a partner brings in a property originally into the stock of the firm as her investment, that property is considered as firm property. So this is the first category of property which will be considered as a firm property. Properties that are bought originally into the stock of the firm. Now secondly, all properties or rights and interests in a property acquired by purchase or otherwise by or for the firm. And thirdly, any property or rights and interest in that property acquired by means of purchase or otherwise for the purpose or in the course of business of the firm. Now, let's quickly understand the difference between buying for the firm and buying in the ordinary course of business of the firm, or buying in the course of business of the firm. So let's take an example, and the firm in our example, let's say the deal in real estate. Now, when this firm, when it buys a property, a real estate property, for the purpose of renovating it and then reselling it, that property will be considered as a property bought for the firm. And the same firm, when it buys laptops for its employees so that they can work on projects of the firm, that purchase, those laptops, those properties will be considered to have been bought in the course of business of the firm. Was that clear? I think it was clear. I am not going to explain it any further because I think the examples are clear. If it's still unclear, if you still want to know something, the comments are always open. Now let's move on to the fourth category of property that will be considered as properties of the firm. So the fourth category of firm property will be goodwill. Yes, the goodwill of a firm is also considered as a property of the firm, and we need to talk about goodwill in detail in a bit. But before we dive into that, there's a little portion of this section, section 14 left. Let's complete that and then we'll dive into goodwill. This part says that if anything or any property is bought with firm money, then unless contrary intentions appear from the actions of the partner or expressly shown, it will be considered as a firm property. It's very simple. If I buy something with my money, it's generally considered as my property. So if anything is bought with the firm money, it will be considered as firm property unless clear contrary intentions appear. Now, there is another provision in this section which is not expressly mentioned in the section but has been mentioned by a judgment of the Andhra High Court in the case of P.N. Murthy and Sons versus V.V. Suguna, in which the Andhra High Court held that merely because a private property of a partner is being used for the purpose of the business of the firm, the court will not necessarily assume that property to be a firm property. To consider that property to be a firm property, there has to be a clear intention shown by the partners. That intention can be expressed like a formal contract, or it can be implied by means of action or whatever. But there has to be some sort of intention shown by the partners. Otherwise, the court, merely because the property was used for firm business, for example, if a car, a private property of one of the partners, is regularly being used for the purpose of the business of the firm, for carrying the goods of the firm or whatever, it won't necessarily mean that the courts will consider that car to be now property of the firm. There has to be clear intentions on the part of the partners. Now, this provision is not clarified in the section, but it has been clarified in this judgment. The name and citations of the judgment are on your screen right now, so go and read the judgment if you want to. But the gist of the judgment is that a property of a private property of a partner, merely because it was used for firm business, will not be considered as firm property. Now, let's get into goodwill. See, the Act, it does not define what goodwill is. They don't believe in making our jobs that easy. However, the Supreme Court, in a case called Kushal Khemgar versus Khorshid Banu, tried to define goodwill. And according to the definition, goodwill is the value of the reputation and connections which the firm establishes over time due to its integrity, efficient service to the consumers, quality of product, industry, etc. Now, to understand this concept of goodwill, let's take the example of e-commerce websites. When you order from, let's say, a Flipkart or Amazon or Myntra, you don't think much before paying upfront while ordering, even though you're gonna get the product maybe after 7 days. But you don't seem to have any problem paying upfront for that product. And this is because in your conscience, you have a belief that a Flipkart or a Amazon or a Myntra, they won't run away with your money. But now think very carefully. Is the case same for a e-commerce website that has cropped up maybe in the last few months, a new e-commerce website? There you choose COD, cash on delivery. You don't pay upfront because you don't believe this new player. This new company has still not built its reputation to an extent where its consumers will be comfortable paying upfront and knowing that the product will be delivered. No. In this case, you want the product in hand first, maybe check it for any defects or anything, and then pay. And if you jog your memory a little bit, you'd remember that just a few years back, when the whole e-commerce scenario was nascent in India, you had these trust issues with today's big daddies like Amazon and Flipkart as well. Because back then, they were the new players and you didn't believe them. So, most people back then opted COD, cash on delivery. But after delivering service for quite some years now in India, and successfully so. People now believe these services so much that every day COD is getting decreased in these platforms. And Mitra, this right here is goodwill. And this goodwill is something that the company has earned through years of efficient service to its consumers. It's not just the probability of old consumers coming back. It is what these old consumers also tell to new people who maybe have still not availed the service of this firm. It is the general chatter in the conscience of the public about the firm. It is what people think of the firm, and it's not created out of thin air. A company, a firm has to work hard for years and years to build this reputation and to build this goodwill. And so when one has to come up with a valuation of a firm, it will be unfair, extremely unfair, if the goodwill of the firm is not taken into account. Because if you are not incorporating the value of the goodwill of a firm, you are actually not remunerating the years of hard work that the firm has put to be in the place where it today might be. So a goodwill of a firm is also considered as a property of the firm. And when, let's say, a firm does not get sold in that way, but in case of a company, because this principle of goodwill also applies in case of a company, as you can understand. When a company gets sold, the goodwill of the company is a very important factor in deciding at what price that company will get sold. And thus, goodwill is a very important part of the firm property, and it is the final and fourth category of our firm property. Now we move on to section 15, application of firm property. So what does application of the property of a firm means? It means where the firm property can be used, or how the firm property can be used. And to make your and my job easier, the statute could not have been any more simpler here. The statute, section 15, very clearly and simply says that a firm property can only be held and used by the partners exclusively for the business of the firm. So whatever business the firm carries on, what is considered as a firm property, that can only be used for carrying on that business of the firm by the partners and nothing else. And as you already might have caught on, if there is a contract between the partners, the provisions of which are in contradiction with the provisions of this section, the provisions of the contract will take effect and the provisions of the sections will not. With that cliched sentence by now, we end today's video. Okay, to sum up, today we understood the concept of property of a firm. What can be considered as a property of a firm? Then we saw what goodwill is and saw how goodwill is valued as a property of the firm. And finally, we saw how and where a firm property can be used. In the next video, we'll start from section 16 and move forward. Now, please like this video if you like this video, and subscribe to the channel if you're liking the channel, the vibe of the channel as a whole. It really helps us, encourages us, and financially helps us as well. Do subscribe and do like the video, and you can watch some of my other videos here and here. I'm watching the monitor right now so that my hands are in the right position. And keep a very good health, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.